All right. Anyway, so let's go to First Kings. We're starting chapter 5. I just want to summarize a little bit about what we did last time because it's connected to where we're going today. So as you recall, we have Solomon praying to God and asking God really only for one thing. He's asking for, well, one, or you could say two things. He's asking for wisdom, and he's asking for the ability to judge and make proper decisions in the handling of his kingdom. In the end, God said to him, he'll give him that, all that, but he was also going to give him wealth and honor. And when we see what happens late, the following stories, etc., that we see really are examples of how Solomon really did receive all these things, these three things from God. And so if we have wisdom, we saw the story of the two prostitutes and the baby that died and all that. It was a very clear example of his wisdom. We then have in chapter 4 this whole listing of the organization of the kingdom and the various ministers, etc. And so we could see that as an example of judgment, judgment being the ability not only to sit in judgment, but to rule and to organize and to make sure everything is going to go smoothly in the organization and administration of the kingdom. And the third thing, of course, is what God said he was going to give him in addition, wealth and honor. And that really is what we're going to see now in chapter 5, the example of Solomon's incredible wealth and honor. And actually, I would like to reread the last verse of chapter 4, because in many ways, it not only sums up chapter 4, but is a very important beginning for chapter 5. And it reads as follows: Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sands of the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. Okay, what does that remind you of? They ate and drank and were happy. I mean, eat, drink, and be happy, right? It's a very common phrase.
For tomorrow we die.
Okay, well,
like,
that's okay. The for tomorrow we die. That's the question, is where that comes from. Eat, drink, and be happy is definitely
Kohelet.
Okay, so that's Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, and I want to take a look at that. So the first part of this verse, we mentioned briefly, but I didn't have the verse in front of me last week.
Which verse is it again?
Pardon?
Which verse is it?
Okay, so we're now in the last verse of chapter 4, which in many ways really is like, can also be seen as the beginning of chapter 5.
Okay.
Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sands of the sea. They ate and drank and were happy, or merry, or whatever. Okay, so the first part of that verse, we did discuss it briefly last week, like the sands of the sea. And I just did not have the reference in front of me, so I did look that up, and I just wanted to reference that. That's in Genesis 22, verse 17. And this takes place right after the binding of Isaac. God appears to Abraham and promises him, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore, and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes. All the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants because you have obeyed my command. This is, Abraham had already been promised that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars of the skies or the heavens. And here we have the addition of the sands at the sea. And of course, this is significant because Abraham receives this promise right after he almost lost his son Isaac. So it's not just this theoretical, yes, your descendants will be numerous, but now he knows for a fact that his son Isaac will continue him, and from Isaac will come this great nation. So of course, this is a very wonderful, wonderful promise. And so what we see here is the way this verse is written is in a way of saying, okay, now is when that promise to Abraham is being fulfilled. Okay, and that's a way of saying it. Now, the second part of this verse, well, the eat, drink, and be merry part, yes, I do believe that this is a reference to Ecclesiastes, and I'd like to refer first of all to Ecclesiastes, chapter 8. Where is my Ecclesiastes? Oh, okay, I should have put a bookmark here to mark it because my English Hebrew Bible, unlike my Hebrew Bible, doesn't have those little tabs that take you straight to, the book, but you're gonna have to flip and flop and floop until you get there. Oh, I'm missing it. Where is it? It's got to be right here.
Verse 15.
I know, but I've got to first find it.
Yeah.
In my Bible. We're talking about, yes, Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 15. Oh, man. Why aren't, I'm at the right place. Proverbs. Oh, Job. Oh. Why am I not finding it? Isn't this crazy? Wait, 1 second. Oh, I'll look it up here. 1 second. Okay, I got it. Sorry about this. Next time I need to put the bookmark not only in the Hebrew Bible, but in the English one. No, I don't have it. What is going on? I don't know. This Bible's a little, here it is. I found it. Okay, Ecclesiastes, chapter 8, verse 15. Here we go. Here we go. I therefore praised happiness, for the only good a man can have under the sun is to eat, drink, and be merry. That much can accompany him in exchange for his wealth, though, through the days of life that God has granted him under the sun. So in a way, he's saying Ecclesiastes, of course, is a very depressed book, very depressing book. And basically, first of all, very important to understand the context here. Ecclesiastes is written by Solomon, okay? It starts out, the first verse of Ecclesiastes is, I am Kohelet, okay? Ecclesiastes, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. This is Solomon, okay? And he wrote this. And it's a very interesting book because he kind of goes back and forth. He talks about, was anything worth anything anyway? And he discusses, well, maybe we should just be, interested in the pleasures of the everyday world. Isn't that what things are about? But then he, of course, disputes that. But here we see that he's talking about, he praised joy or praised happiness, for the only good a man can have under the sun is to eat and drink and be merry. He's saying, what else is there to like? Okay, nothing else really matters. And then in verse 16, he says, for I have set my mind to learn wisdom and to observe the business that goes on in the world, even to the extent of going without sleep day and night. And I have observed all that God brings to pass. Indeed, man cannot guess the events that occur under the sun, for man tries strenuously but fails to guess them. And even if a sage should think to discover them, he would not be able to guess them. So you have a sense here that his tongue-in-cheek, the eat, drink, and be merry, is kind of tongue-in-cheek. And it's expressing a bit of frustration. Well, I'm trying to figure this all out and I can't. And I'm very smart, okay? And I can't figure it out, all right? And I think this idea we see even more directly in the second chapter of Ecclesiastes. I like that verse in chapter 8 because that's where you have the eat, drink, and be merry. But this whole idea that he's kind of toying with, you have in really the entire chapter 2, if you look at from the beginning, I said to myself, come, I will treat you to merriment, taste mirth. That too I found was futile. Of revelry, I said, it is mad. Of merriment, what good is that? So he's kind of here the opposite. He's saying, well, I tried all this good stuff, but what's it worth? I ventured to tempt my flesh with wine and to grasp folly, while letting my mind direct with wisdom, to the end that I might learn which of the two was better for men to practice in their few days of life under heaven. I multiplied my possessions. I built myself houses, and I planted vineyards. I laid out gardens and groves in which I planted every kind of fruit tree. I constructed pools of water, enough to irrigate a forest shooting up with trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I acquired stewards. I also acquired more cattle, both herds and flocks, and all who were before me in Jerusalem. I further amassed silver and gold and treasures of kings and provinces, and I got myself male and female singers, as well as the luxuries of commoners, coffers and coffers of them. Thus I gained more wealth than anyone before me in Jerusalem. In addition, my wisdom remained with me. I withheld from my eyes nothing they asked for and denied myself no enjoyment. Rather, I got enjoyment out of all my wealth, and that was all I got out of my wealth. Okay? Then my thoughts turned to all the fortune my hands had built up, to the wealth I had acquired and won, and it was all futile and pursuit of wind. There was no real value under the sun. For what will the man be like who will succeed, the one who's ruling over what was built up long ago? My thoughts also turned to appraising wisdom and madness and folly. I found that wisdom is superior to folly, as light is superior to darkness. A wise man has his eyes in his head, whereas a fool walks in darkness. But I also realized that the same fate awaits them both. Okay, what do we have here in chapter 2? First of all, in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, first of all, he is describing himself and his circumstances. I have wealth. I have power. I have happiness. I have a good life. Everything is great. Okay, and he goes into extensive descriptions. Okay, but then what he says is, but you know what? I found even that is folly. He says, I found even wisdom turns to folly. He says, wisdom might be superior to folly, but at the end, the same fate awaits them both. So he kind of is drawing into question not only all of the physical, material blessings that he has enjoyed and his very happiness. He has a good life. He has a good time. Everything is great, but he calls into question, well, what is the value of all this? What does it mean? And of course, even wisdom, which clearly is superior to all this other stuff, even that, what is it worth and what does it mean? Now, why do I think this is extremely relevant here? So first of all, let's remember the time frame here. Okay, the Book of Kings starts with the David's death and the reign of Solomon, but it continues all the way. And don't forget, First King and Second King is really the same book, but it was divided artificially in the middle. So if we go from the beginning of First Kings to the very end of Second Kings, the end of Second Kings ends at the destruction of the first temple and the exile to Babylon and to Egypt of the Jews. Jeremiah is like the closing whatever. The very, very end of the Book of Kings, we even have a little bit of hope as one of the last kings of Judah, who was in prison in Babylon, is released from prison and treated with respect. They're in exile in Babylon. That's the book, okay? Which means that the book itself was written, or at least the final editing, the final writing of the book had to have been done after the first temple is destroyed. Okay, now it's going back and it's recording events that happened before, and they have probably much of this written down already, and we believe that is all dictated in a prophetic way, okay, but it doesn't happen till the end, okay? The story is sealed with the last possible point of the book at the end of that story. Ecclesiastes is a book written by Solomon. So the writing of that book takes place sometime during Solomon's life, which basically coincides with the events that we're describing here at the beginning of the book, the reign of Solomon. Now, They say that Ecclesiastes was probably written towards the end of Solomon's life because it reflects a much more mature, much wiser, more reflective man, probably more typical of the elder king Solomon after looking back on his life, etc. So what that means, though, is then when this book is written, the Book of Kings is written, when it uses these verses in verse 20, eat, drink, and be merry, it is already aware of Ecclesiastes, okay? So in a way, it is purposely using this language to refer us back to Ecclesiastes as a way of saying everything now, we kind of picked up hints of this all along, and we'll see this more as we go along. The way Solomon's reign in the early days is described is literally an ideal situation. He has wealth, he has power, he is loyal to God, he obeys God's commandments, he's a peaceful reign, he's not dealing with any serious issues, okay, or serious challenges to his reign. And yet, scripture here is putting in this little reference to Ecclesiastes as if to hint to us, it seems everything is great, but there's an underlying tension here. There's stuff going on here that at the end of the day are going to bring us to the end of Solomon's life, which is far more problematic. And it's as if it's a way of telling us Solomon himself, towards the end of his life, looked back on this period and said, yes, I had power, I had wealth, I was in an eat, drink, and be merry kind of situation. But then I realized, what is it worth? Then I wondered, where do we all go? And again, all those very deep philosophical questions that Ecclesiastes is all about. So I think that is very, very relevant. Now, as we go into chapter 5, and I think this is particularly relevant, what I mentioned earlier is that God promises to Solomon wealth and power, and that chapter 5 is the evidence of the wealth and power. And look, as we're going to now read chapter 5, I think you will find tremendous echoes to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Very similar kind of description of the wealth and the everything that he had. So let's start chapter 5. Solomon's rule extended over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines and the boundary of Egypt. They brought Solomon tribute and were subject to him all his life. So if we talked about honor, which is what God promised him, not just wealth, but honor, the honor that he promises him is an honor amongst the nations. He says, let's see if I can just find exactly what he says. I didn't mark it, but he, whatever. Anyway, I'm not, but you can go back and you can see he talks about honor. This is one of the things that is promised to him. And here it is. 1 second. It says here, this is in chapter 3, verse 13. And I also grant you what you did not ask for, both riches and glory or honor, all your life, the like of which no king has ever had. Okay. And you have a sense here that when he talks about glory, talks about the respect that is due to him or that comes to him from nations all over the world. He's the glory of a king, also from within and also from without. So this is what verse 1 in chapter 5 is showing us. His power goes all across the area. Verse 2. Solomon's daily provisions consisted of 30 cores of semolina, 60 cores of flour, 10 fattened oxen, 20 pasture-fed oxen, and 100 sheep and goats, besides deer and gazelles, roebucks, and fatted geese. For he controlled the whole region west of the Euphrates, all the kings west of the Euphrates, from Tifsach to Gaza, and he had peace on all his borders round about. All the days of Solomon, Judah and Israel from Dan to Beersheba dwelt in safety, everyone under his own vine and under his own fig tree. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariotry and 12,000 horsemen. All of these prefects, each during his month, would furnish provisions for King Solomon. And for all who were admitted to King Solomon's table, they did not fall short in anything. They would also, each in his turn, deliver barley and straw for the horses and the swift steeds to the places where they were stationed. And then we have again, God endowed Solomon with wisdom and discernment in great measure, with understanding as vast as the sands on the seashore. We have that expression repeated. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the Kedemites, and then all the wisdom of the Egyptians. He was the wisest of all men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Shalkol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. Fame spread among all the surrounding nations. And then it goes on about his wisdom. He composed 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He discoursed about trees, from the cedar in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. And he discoursed about beasts, birds, creeping things, and fishes. Okay. Men of all peoples came to hear Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. So here we have really this description that very much falls into God's promise of wealth and glory. But I think it also very much echoes chapter 2 in Ecclesiastes. And I think that is not by coincidence, okay? Now, I do want to focus on one verse here. Okay, and that is verse 5. Let's see. Verse 5, all the days of Solomon, Judah and Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, dwelt in safety, everyone under his own vine and under his own fig tree. This becomes it's a statement, by the way, that is echoed. It becomes an expression that is quoted over and over in Jewish sources as a way of expressing an ideal time. Okay, and Solomon's time is referenced. It's a time of incredible wealth, power, peace. Okay, and what we have here is that this peace was not just about a king that was powerful, but a peace and a wealth that trickled down to all the people. Okay, so we're saying that the individual person sat under his own vine and his own fig tree. In other words, there was individual wealth, contentment, peace. Everybody shared in the blessings that Solomon had brought to the kingdom. Now, it's very interesting. If you look at the book of Micah, Micah chapter 4, Micah chapter 4, verse 4. Okay, now it's very interesting because Micah chapter 4 has a great deal in common. In fact, a lot of it is word for word with a similar prophecy in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah 2, okay? Isaiah chapter 2 is almost identical to Micah chapter 4. They start out the same way, okay? So let's start reading it in Micah chapter 4. In the days to come, the mount of the Lord's house shall stand firm above the mountains, and it shall tower over the hills. The people shall gaze on it with joy, and the many nations shall go and shall say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may instruct us in his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For instruction shall come forth from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Okay, so let me continue. Thus he will judge among the many peoples and arbitrate for the multitude of nations, however distant, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation, but they shall never again know war. Okay, up until here, the very, very identical phrase versus the same scripture is in Isaiah 2. But the next verse in Micah is not in Isaiah 2. It's different. And that verse says as follows. Verse 4. But every man shall sit under his grapevine or fig tree with no one to disturb him, for it was the Lord of hosts who spoke. Now, when Micah does this, it's a clear quote Micah is after Solomon's time, okay? Micah is a clear quote to Solomon. And what this prophecy is basically setting up, it's the end time prophecy. What's it going to be like in the end times? And so we have Micah giving you a bit of an introduction to that, some descriptions. What we have is peace. We have the word of God going forth to Jerusalem. Nations all over the world are seeking God. There's no war. We have our swords being beat into plowshares. So instead of spending your budget on defense, you are spending your budget on food and welfare and education and all these things. But this extra verse that is not in Isaiah, okay, is telling us essentially in Micah's vision, in the vision of this prophecy, the ideal after the ideal end of days takes us back to Solomon. In what we are describing here in 1 Kings chapter 5 is the ideal. Solomon reached that ideal, albeit for a brief time. And what Micah is saying, we're going to go back to that ideal, except it will stay with us, okay? Isaiah is different. Isaiah, first of all, goes on in Isaiah 2, talks about let us walk by the light of the Lord, etc., etc. But as I'm sure you know very well, later on, Isaiah continues to talk about what does an end of days look like. And it ends up bringing a very, very idealized, almost not realistic vision of what it will look like. In chapter 11, we have a very messianic prophecy. I'm talking about Isaiah chapter 11, a very messianic prophecy. And we have a shoot shall grow out of the stump of Jesse, a twig shall sprout from his stalk, the Spirit of the Lord shall light upon him. And then we have, not only there'll be no wars, but look at verse 6. This is Isaiah 11, 6. The wolf will dwell with the lamb, the leopard lie down with the kid, the calf, the beast of prey, and the fatling together with a little boy to herd them. What do we have described here in Isaiah? Something completely supernatural. The vision that we have in Isaiah is a vision of an end of days that is not just peace and quiet and following God's word, but a supernatural above changing of nature. I mean, lion and sheep do not lie together. That's not how God created them in their nature. Isaiah is saying all of nature will change. Micah is saying no. He doesn't have that anywhere in his prophecies. Micah says life will be the same laws of nature, but people will act better because they will be obeying God. Now, actually, these two separate visions of redemption, what it will look like, remain shall we say, an argument, an ongoing debate in Jewish tradition. When people say, what will it look like? One view says totally supernatural. The other says, no, it's going to be the same laws of nature, but it'll be good. It'll be ideal. It's not going to be, same human beings are the same human beings, but for some reason they'll be acting good. They'll be righteous, okay? As opposed to, and this is really two different views. I don't think any of us really have the answers to it, and it could be it's some combination. There are people who have suggested that these are two different stages. The first stage is within nature. The second stage is a supernatural. I don't know if that anybody knows the answer to this, okay? But I think it's very interesting, and I think it's very relevant that what basically the point here is that Micah's vision of an end of days harkens back to Samuel. And I think this is something, it tells us a great deal that this description that we have in chapter 5, and particularly focusing on this verse, in verse 5, in chapter 5, each man, everyone under his own vine and under his own fig tree, really is, it tells us something. This is an ideal time, and it's this phrase that's picked up by Micah in order to say what is an ideal time. But again, and of course we'll continue with this, we will continue with verse 15 next week. I say everything is wonderful, everything is perfect, and yet there's this, this is not the end of days. This is Solomon. Mistakes are made, people sin, and so in a way, I go back to the last verse of verse 4, eat, drink, and be merry, reminding us of Ecclesiastes. The picture that is painted for us at the beginning of chapter 5 is this ideal, but the ideal will be shattered. Initially, very small hints here and there, but of course, things will develop differently. And in next week, we will start with with verse 15, where we will see already a little bit of a what's going on here, and is there a problem here kind of thing. And we will take that up. Very subtle, very, very subtle. We're not talking about real sins yet. We're talking about subtle hints. Okay. So any questions?
No, but I was fascinated on your thoughts on Isaiah, I have to say. My sisters, because Carol can't be here today, and my view of Isaiah too is that when the Messiah comes, or we would say return to Jerusalem, that those are the days when it says all nations in verse 2 of chapter 2 will go up to Jerusalem, and the Jewish people, or the saints, those redeemed, will be asking, well, what are these laws of Israel? What is the history? Why is Jerusalem the central place? And referring to your thing in the wolf and the lamb lie together, I guess I would fall into what you call the word supernatural, though I wouldn't call it supernatural. I think before the fall, before sin, and we don't know the answer to this, before there was sin and death, were the animals at each other? Was it?
Well, that's a very good question. Yeah.
We don't
Right.
know. And if all things are restored, and if sin is taken away, then surely, as the end of Revelation, well, you don't have Revelation.
Well, again, see, this
talks
is a
about-
debate because we don't know that sin is taken away.
Yeah,
We
which it
we
talks about the fulfillment and the returning to the state of paradise, which was in Eden before the
But
fall of man.
No, but you see, okay, so this might be a difference how Judaism and Christianity sees things, but in the Garden of Eden, man was perfectly capable of sinning. God gave him one commandment, right?
Yeah.
He said, honor the garden, and watch it, tend to it, right? Don't eat from this tree. Okay, so they had a positive commandment, take care of the garden, and the negative commandment, don't eat from this tree. Okay. And that one negative commandment, that one don't, okay, they did. All right.
Yeah.
So man had every ability to sin.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, when you go back to, if indeed the end of days at some level takes us back to the Garden of Eden, that doesn't mean we are deprived of the ability to sin. And I think this goes back to the exact same thing, because if you're going to say that you're deprived of the ability to sin, that in and of itself is supernatural. You're changing the nature of man. And I think this is part of that same debate that goes on in Judaism. Will wolves and sheep change?
Well, if you
Will
like that
man
debate,
change? Or
that debate is rounded. That debate is rounded, then, if you like, with a New Testament that you don't refer to, because
right. But
what
we
that
don't follow that. Yeah.
is that the sin by following commandments, and in Carol's and my view, very much based on your faith, because it is this David and the root of Jesse and the branch being grafted in. At that point, then sin is removed, and so yes, nature is changed, but
Well, do
only
you all believe that sin is removed?
yes, at the end of end
No, I'm
time.
asking everybody else
Oh
on
well, no,
that.
I wouldn't
No, I'm
expect.
saying,
I
do you,
believe that.
okay.
I believe there will be
No,
a
is that
time
a
when
debate?
the pure
That's what I'm
heart.
trying to say. Is that a
Yeah.
debate within Christianity,
I
or
think-
is that settled?
I would not necessarily assume that others hold to my
Right.
opinion.
No, I'm saying I would like to hear from some other people on this issue.
So I would agree with Allison. There are definitely Christians like Allison and myself that believe that man's heart of stone will be replaced with a heart of flesh, and sin will be removed from the world. But I am quite sure that there are Christians that don't agree.
Mhm.
No,
I
Anybody
think
else have something?
so
Yes, Maria.
I am totally
Maria?
100%. I am a Yeshua believer myself. So sin must be removed in order to have a clean relationship with the Holy God. There
Okay,
cannot
everybody
be
else
sin,
feels the same way?
absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm
I've
sorry?
never heard that
Lynn?
before. I've never
Okay.
heard that mentioned at all.
Yeah.
That's a new one to me, completely new.
Okay,
when
so it's
when
not,
Christ comes to take us, or when our Messiah comes, sin can't be there because he's not to be in the presence of sin.
Right.
And so I think it's important to understand that and
Yeah.
That
realize
fits.
that we're
1
going to be
Corinthians
free from
15.
it. We're
1
going to be,
Corinthians 15. And yeah.
yeah, we're going to be
okay,
free.
anyway, this is a very interesting discussion, and I think for us that we don't have those answers yet. It could be this, for some of you at least, that this is very much settled already in your doctrines. But it is interesting, and I think it is, what I talked now about the difference between Micah and Isaiah, of course, that difference is obvious and people talk about that, etc. But this actual analysis that I brought before you is not my own. It's one that I heard from someone who I'm studying Isaiah with here in Israel. His name is Rabbi Benny Lau, very, very brilliant Bible teacher. So it's not my own. I've brought it to you because I find it very, very interesting and very meaningful. But in any case, whatever you think Isaiah is trying to say, I think there's no question that what Micah is saying is that the ideal time is Solomon's time. And that's really the point that I think we can all agree with in terms of what Micah is doing with this verse, each man under his vineyard and under his
Yeah, I've heard
fig tree.
the prayer. I also once in a while I listen to B'nai Israel in New York. That's a prominent independent Jewish synagogue, and they have this in the prayer for at the end of the service. So it's a beautiful prayer.
No, it's a beautiful phrase,
a
and it
beautiful
shows up
prayer.
all over in Jewish sources. It just, it's something that represents this ideal time, and
Yeah,
it is
of
beautiful. It
unity,
really is
of
beautiful.
unity.
Yeah, and I do think also, though, what's on its most simple level here, it's also telling us, which is something really so special about Solomon. Most kings, their power or their success is judged by the size of their army, the number of their conquests, and how much money is in their coffers. It was rare in ancient times that anybody cared what was the quality of life of the individual subjects of that king. And what is so special here is that you have a king that also fits, matches up as respected and honored by all the kings in the area, because he ticks off all those boxes. And yet beyond that, he cares about his people and makes sure that the wealth and prosperity and peace trickles down to every individual person. And I think that's really, it's something so special. And of course, something we all would like to hope that our leaders, you take this as their mantra, as their goal, as their ideal. Unfortunately, far too many of our leaders are not pure in this way. And we will leave it at that. All right. Anyway, it was great to see you all, and we'll see you again next week.